Sometimes as I lay in bed, conversations from the day before start running through my mind. How do I know what God's will really is? How do I know if my choices are led by Him, or if I'm just imagining they're led by Him? How can I submit to a figure of authority who doesn't even seem to be following God Himself? My questions go on and on and on, often keeping me in a state of sleepless frustration. Velvet Elvis to me was not an answer. But based on the fact that this book has, since its 2005 release, sold over 500,000 copies, I figured that a lot of other Christians are also laying in bed with questions running through their minds. As Rob Bell, the author of this book, himself noted, he does not have the answers to these questions. Instead, he wrote this book as a continuation of questions that we're all asking. I think that's one thing I really enjoyed about this book, because a question is such an unassuming place to begin. It leaves so much room for interpretation. And while Bell doesn't presume to have the answers to these questions, he specifies a position, a context from within which he comes. And so I appreciate that. On the matter of the Bible, Bell is pretty clear. Bell sees the Bible as the final authority. He mentions that he has spent 10 years studying, reading, teaching, and trying to understand the Bible. He outlines some of his core interpretations of the Bible, which he does preface as interpretations. He affirms the virgin birth, the Trinity, inspiration of the Bible, that God created all, that Jesus is Lord, and that God has a plan to restore everything. However, he emphasizes that the Bible is open-ended, subject to interpretation. He states that one of the responsibilities for Christians is to be able to make decisions about what the Bible means for them personally in a contemporary, modern-day, what's relevant to your life context. So even though Bell cites the Bible as the final authority, he specifies that the Bible is the authority because it contains stories about people interacting with God, who is the one with real authority. The matter of discovering truth is an issue that lies at the very heart of all religions and versions of faith and spirituality. What Bell does is put questions, the very questions that brought us to question and either come up with or pursue some version of faith, at the heart of this very faith itself. Bell says that the asking of these questions is actually what brings about freedom from them, or actually the freedom from the necessity to have these questions figured out. Two really big metaphors that Bell uses for faith are a brick wall versus a trampoline. Are we jumping, enjoying Christ along with our doubts and questions? Or are we facing a wall that, when it has one brick removed, simply crumbles? I think an even better metaphor that Bell uses for faith is that of faith as a swimming pool, a pool that a person dives into, keeps swimming downward into, and yet never reaches the bottom of. Bell uses two interesting words to describe salvation: holistic and harmonious. He says that salvation isn't just a one-time event that consists of reconciliation of the physical body or soul to God. Rather, salvation is a current, ongoing process of increasingly harmonious living with God. Therefore, salvation is a process, it's not an event. It's a relationship rather than the declaration of a relationship. Bell identifies himself as a Christian, and as such, he doesn't fill much space in his book with descriptions or explorations of religions beyond Christianity. Instead, he endorses what many people would refer to as a broad sort of faith, a faith that is based largely on feelings, sensations, perceptions of reality. So for Bell, objective truth can be found within subjective experience. Bell wrote about truth as something to be found and claimed, rather than possessed and imposed on others. This changes the entire dynamic, the whole model of gospel work as many people see it. Rather than being a work of bringing truth to those who are somehow lacking, it is pointing out to people that God is already in their midst, expressing Himself in ways that they have already experienced. It's true that some of these statements are a little abstract and seemingly non-committal. I mean, if I find truth in something harmful to other human beings, who is to argue with me and say that my truth is not an ultimate reality? Although Bell makes it clear that anyone's opinion is valid as long as the truth is valid for the person who holds that truth, he does take a position on where he personally thinks the ultimate truth lies, in Jesus as the source and pathway to all truth. Bell's focus is on the Bible, bringing him to an examination of what type of a book the Bible itself is, and thus what type of a reading it requires. He wrote that the Bible as a book is living and active. And what it might seem that he means by this is that the stories in it are alive and active and visible in many various facets of our lives today. Christians are continually being tempted, sinning, turning from God, being reconciled to God, being saved out of darkness and into light, but Bell crucially emphasizes that all the stories we have in the Bible are subject to interpretation. What we study today is a product of years of interpretation, and how we follow it is also the result of some interpretation. Bell relates this process of interpretation to the process of binding and loosing that was written of in Matthew 16:19. In this book, Bell writes about something that most people living in the 21st century can identify with, this crazy need to get things done, to meet life milestones. Actually, one of my favorite verses is Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters. Sometimes I feel that I have a dozen masters to please. And so, people's souls are continually suffering. Many people really need a break. People are actually near their breaking point. And it's not even that there's even some people working for the church who are in this position, but especially that there are people working for the church who often find themselves in this position. Bell himself opens up about his own experience in therapy, and although his focus is on the realization of our brokenness and problems deep within the soul, he continually centers the benefits of his own treatment and therapy on the fact that Christ was a part of it.
I'm the lead pastor. I can't doubt, or I can't take a day off. What would that message would that send to the people?
Brokenness necessitates dependence on God. Sickness requires healing from the cross. Baggage and destructive messages require the bright lights of Christ's presence. This discussion brings me to a specific question. Is psychology as a scientific discipline adequate alone? May the soul be treated without regard for the spirit? What should Christian psychology look like? How explicit should the Christian faith be in the practice of clinical psychology? On the one hand, these sound like excellent questions. On the other, the answers to these questions will differ for each client and situation that a therapist is working with. Indeed, these very questions begin to sound quite reminiscent of questions that many struggling Christians ask about the very foundations of their faith. If a baby dies, is the baby subject to judgment? Is murder permissible in the name of self-defense? How can we feasibly love our neighbors as ourselves? And so, it may be most useful to leave these questions open-ended for clients, because questions that are rooted in humility, as Bell notes, are what truly bring about freedom. And within therapy, humility is a requirement, while freedom, that's the goal of therapy.